He was always a new kid. From the moment he was old enough to understand what a classroom looked like, Keanu knew the feeling of walking into a room where everyone else already had a place. While other children had friends they had known since kindergarten, Keanu had a collection of addresses in his head that changed as often as the seasons. He was a drifter, not because he wanted to be, but because the world he was born into was constantly shifting beneath his feet. His childhood was a patchwork of different cities and different lives. Born in Beirut, Lebanon, to an English mother and a Chinese-Hawaiian father. His start was complicated. When his parents' relationship fell apart, his mother moved him and his sisters to New York City. It was a place of loud noises and tall buildings, but it didn't last. They soon moved to Toronto, Canada. For a long time, Toronto was the closest thing he had to a home base. But even there, stability was rare. His mother, Patricia, was a costume designer with a free spirit. She loved her children, but she also loved her work and the adventure of moving to new places. This meant that Keanu spent much of his youth packing boxes, saying goodbyes, and stepping into the unknown. Growing up like this teaches a person to be adaptable. You learn to read a room quickly. You learn to smile even when you feel like an outsider, because you want to make a connection before you have to leave again. But it also plants a deep seed of loneliness inside you. Keanu felt this often. He was a quiet boy in the back of class, the one who didn't raise his hand, even when he knew the answer. School was not easy for him. He struggled with dyslexia, a learning difference that made words dance around on the page. Letters looked backward, and sentences refused to make sense. In the 1970s and 80s, people didn't understand dyslexia as well as they do now. Teachers often mistook his struggle for a lack of intelligence or effort. He remembers the frustration clearly. It wasn't just about getting a bad grade. It was about feeling stupid. He would sit at a desk with a book open, his heart pounding in his chest, feeling the heat rise in his cheeks as the other students turned pages effortlessly. The world seemed to be moving faster than he could. He was eventually expelled from one high school for being too rambunctious. It wasn't that he was a bad kid. He was just a kid with a lot of energy and nowhere safe to put it. He felt lost, like a ship without a harbor, bobbing on a rough ocean. Through all this moving and all this confusion, there was one constant that kept him from drifting away entirely: his sisters. Keanu wasn't an only child. He had sisters, and in the chaos of their family life, they formed their own tight little unit. Of all his siblings, his bond with Kim was the strongest. She was younger than him, and from the moment she was born, Keanu felt a fierce need to protect her. If his parents were busy or if the world felt too big and scary, Kim was the person he could hold on to. They shared a secret language that only children of broken homes understand. They knew how to comfort each other without speaking. When their mother was working late or when the electricity in their latest apartment was turned off because money was tight, they would sit together in the dim light. Keanu would tell her stories or make her laugh until she forgot about the cold or the hunger. It was in these moments that he realized his true purpose wasn't just to survive. It was to look after the people he loved. He promised himself, silently and solemnly, that he would never let anything terrible happen to Kim if he could stop it. She was his anchor. If he was drifting, she was a heavy weight that kept him tethered to the earth. Because school was difficult and home life was unstable, Keanu looked for an escape. He found it on the ice. Hockey is more than just a game in Canada. It is a religion. For a boy with restless energy and a need to belong, the hockey rink was a sanctuary. When he stepped onto the ice, lacing up his skates tight, the confusion in his head seemed to fade away. The world became simple. There was a puck, there was a net, and there was a team. He was a good hockey player, really good. He played goalie, a position that requires focus and bravery. You have to be willing to stand in the way of a hard piece of rubber flying at your face. He loved the violence of it and the grace of it. He was nicknamed the Wall because he was so hard to get past. For a few hours, he wasn't the dyslexic kid or the new boy. He was a warrior. He dreamed of playing professionally. He imagined a future where his life was just the next game, the next tournament, the next win. It was a clean dream, uncomplicated by the messy realities of his family life. But life has a way of interrupting dreams. As he got older, reality began to set in. A knee injury slowed him down, and the realization that he might not make the pros started to creep in. It was a heavy blow. Hockey had been his shield against the world. Without it, he felt exposed again. It was around this time that he started to look for something else to fill the space. He needed a new way to express himself, a new way to be someone else for a while. He stumbled into acting almost by accident. A friend of his mother's suggested he try it. At first, it was just a way to get out of school. But then, something clicked. When he was on a stage or in front of camera, he didn't have to be Keanu, the sad boy who moved around too much. He could be anyone. He could be a hero, a villain, a lover, or fighter. He could take all the confusing feelings he had inside, anger, sadness, joy, and let them out through a character. It felt safe. He started doing small plays and commercials in Toronto. He wasn't an instant success. He had to work hard, memorizing lines despite his dyslexia. He would read scripts over and over again until the words stuck. It was a struggle, but it was a struggle he chose. He liked the feeling of being part of a cast. Similar to being on a hockey team. You worked together, you helped each other, and you created something together. It gave him a sense of belonging that he had been craving his entire life. However, as he started to get a little bit of attention in Toronto, he realized that if he wanted to really make it, he would have to leave. The biggest stage was in Los Angeles, thousands of miles away. This meant leaving his sanctuary. It meant leaving his sisters, especially Kim, who was his best friend. It was the hardest decision he had ever made. The thought of getting on a plane and leaving her behind terrified him. Who would make her laugh? Who would protect her? But he was young, and the pull of the future was strong. He looked at his life in Toronto and saw that he had hit a ceiling. To become the man he wanted to be, to find the success that might finally give him the stability he longed for, he had to go. He sat down with Kim and told her he was leaving. They made a pact that day. They promised that no matter how far apart they were, they would always be there for each other. Distance wouldn't break their bond. So, at the age of 20, with an old beat-up car and a few dollars in his pocket, Keanu drove out of Toronto. He didn't have a map for his life, just like he didn't have a permanent home for so many years. He was heading toward the bright lights of Hollywood, chasing a dream that felt both huge and fragile. He was leaving behind the hockey rinks, the cold winters, and the only true family he had ever really known. As he drove, the city skyline fading in the rearview mirror, he must have felt that familiar mix of fear and excitement. He was used to it by now. It was a feeling of starting over. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just running away from instability. He was running towards something. He didn't know it yet, but the journey ahead would test him in ways hockey never could. The pain he would face in the future would make the struggles of his childhood seem small. But as he drove down the highway, the wind in his hair, he was just a young man hoping for a chance to be seen, hoping for a place to call home, and holding on to the memory of his sister's smile as his guide. He was ready to fight for his future, unaware that the battles ahead would be fought not in the rink, but in the depths of his own heart. When he first arrived in Los Angeles, the city didn't feel like a home. It felt like a giant, hot oven filled with cars and people who were all rushing somewhere important. He had very little money in his pocket and a beat-up car that barely ran. For a while, it was just like the old days, moving from one cheap motel room to another, trying to find a place to sleep that didn't cost too much. He would go to auditions during the day, reading lines for casting directors who barely looked up from their coffee, and then he would drive back to a small, dark room at night. But slowly, things started to change. He had a look that was different from the other guys in Hollywood. He wasn't the typical polished, perfect actor. He had a rough edge, a messy way of speaking, and a face that showed everything he was feeling. Directors started to notice him. He landed a role in a hockey movie, which felt like a full-circle moment, even if the film wasn't a massive hit. Then came the role that would change his life forever, a slacker named Ted in a goofy time-travel movie called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Nobody thought that movie was going to be a big deal. It was just a silly comedy about two guys who weren't very smart but had good hearts. But when it came out, people went crazy for it. Keanu became a star overnight. Suddenly, everyone knew his name. They loved his "whoa" catchphrase and his goofy grin. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the invisible new kid. He was the center of attention. But even with all the noise and the fame, he still felt like an observer. He would walk down the street and see posters of his face, but it felt like he was looking at a stranger. The fame grew bigger and faster. He wanted to prove he wasn't just a whoa guy from the comedy. He wanted to be taken seriously. He started taking on harder roles. He played a conflicted cop in the movie Point Break, surfing massive waves and chasing bank robbers. Then came Speed, the movie where he had to stop a bus from blowing up. He was jumping from cars, hanging off the sides of vehicles, and running through traffic. The world saw an action hero, a man made of steel and bravery. They saw a guy who was living the dream. But behind the sunglasses and the movie stardom, Keanu was still the same lonely kid from Toronto. The money was nice, and the work was exciting, but there was a hole in his life that success couldn't fill. He needed people around him who were real, people who didn't care about the movie posters. He found that connection in a group of young actors who were also trying to figure out who they were. The most important of them was a young man named River Phoenix. River was different from anyone else Keanu had met in Hollywood. He wasn't chasing the next big paycheck or trying to be famous. He was an artist. He was deep, thoughtful, and incredibly talented. They met on the set of a movie called My Own Private Idaho, where they played two friends living on the edge of society. The chemistry between them wasn't just acting. It was real. They bonded instantly over their shared pasts. Like Keanu, River had grown up in a strange, nomadic family. They both knew what it felt like to not fit in. They became inseparable. They were like brothers, closer than blood relatives. They would spend hours talking about music, about life, about the universe. They played in a band together, just for fun of making noise in a garage. River was the one person Keanu could be completely honest with. He didn't have to put on a movie star face. Around River, he could just be Keanu, the guy who liked hockey, read books, and worried about the future. River had a light inside him that drew people in. He was passionate about saving the environment and helping others. He made Keanu want to be a better person. While Keanu's career was skyrocketing with Speed and other action movies, River was also becoming a huge star. They were the two kings of young Hollywood, but they didn't act like kings. They acted like regular guys who just happened to be in movies. They supported each other through the craziness of premieres and press junkets. When the flashing cameras became too much, they would retreat to quiet corners, just two friends hanging out, grounding each other. But underneath the bright lights of their success, there were dark shadows. River was struggling with the pressures of fame and the pain of his past. He was sensitive, and the world felt loud and harsh to him sometimes. Keanu saw his friend hurting and tried to be there for him, but you can't always save someone from their own demons. They were young, rich, and famous, but they were also human, which means they were fragile. The turning point came on a Halloween night in 1993. It was a cool night in Los Angeles. The streets were filled with people in costumes, laughing and celebrating. Keanu wasn't with River that night. He was somewhere else, perhaps working, perhaps just resting, unaware that his life was about to change forever. River was at a popular nightclub on the Sunset Strip called the Viper Room. It was a place where music played loud and the nights went on until morning. Outside the club, on the pavement under the bright neon signs, River collapsed. It was sudden and shocking. Despite the efforts of people to help him and the rush of an ambulance, he didn't make it. The news hit the airwaves like a thunderclap. The world was stunned. A bright, talented young man was gone in an instant. When Keanu found out, it felt like the ground had opened up and swallowed him. He wasn't just mourning a colleague. He was mourning his brother. The pain was physical, a sharp ache in his chest that made it hard to breathe. All the success he had achieved, all the money, the fans, the hit movies, suddenly meant absolutely nothing. He realized in that moment that fame is a fragile shield. It can protect you from bad reviews or empty pockets, but it cannot protect you from death. It cannot stop the people you love from leaving. He attended the funeral, standing among the mourners, feeling a sense of disbelief that still hadn't faded. It felt wrong that the world kept turning. The sun still came up, people still went to work, and movies were still being made. But for Keanu, the colors of the world had turned to gray. River had been his anchor in the storm of Hollywood. Without him, Keanu felt untethered again, drifting back into that loneliness he knew as a child. This loss marked the end of his youth. He was no longer just a goofy guy from Bill and Ted or the action hero from Speed. He was a man who had stared into the face of real tragedy and seen how empty it could be. He became quieter, more serious. The lightness in his eyes dimmed a little. He threw himself into his work even harder, not because he wanted more fame, but because being on a movie set gave him a place to go where he didn't have to think about the silence in his own life. He started to choose roles that were darker, more complex. He wanted to explore pain and loss on screen, because he was living it off screen. He didn't talk about it much in interviews. He didn't want to turn his grief into a spectacle. He kept it private, holding on to the memory of his friend like a secret treasure. But anyone who looked closely could see the change. The boy who had once surfed on top of buses for fun now carried a heavy weight on his shoulders. The tragedy with River Phoenix taught Keanu a harsh lesson about life, that it is unpredictable and unfair. He learned that time is the most valuable thing we have, because we never know how much it we gets. It made him cherish the people who were still in his life, especially his sister Kim. He realized that every goodbye could be the last one, and that you should never leave things unsaid. As the 1990s continued, Keanu Reeves became one of the biggest actors in the world, but he was also becoming one of the loneliest. He had everything a person could supposedly want, yet he was missing the one thing he couldn't buy, the brotherhood of the person who understood him best. The loss of River cast a long shadow over his success, a reminder that no matter how high you climb, pain can always find you. And this was only the beginning. The universe, it seemed, was not finished testing him yet. He had survived the first great heartbreak, but his heart was far from done breaking. After the darkness of losing his best friend, Keanu found a flicker of light. It wasn't a spotlight from a movie premiere, and it wasn't the flash of cameras. It was something softer, something real. He met a woman named Jennifer Syme. She wasn't an actress looking for fame. She worked in the music industry and had a creative soul that matched his own. When they looked at each other, the noise of the world seemed to quiet down. For the first time in a long time, Keanu felt like he could just be himself. He didn't have to perform. He didn't have to be the action hero or the funny guy. He could just sit with her and talk, or sometimes just sit in silence, which was even better. Their love grew quietly, away from the gossip columns. They were a private couple, enjoying simple things like going to bookstores or listening to records in a living room. Keanu, who had spent so much of his life feeling like a guest in other people's worlds, finally felt like he was building his own world. Then came the news that would change everything. Jennifer was pregnant. Keanu was going to be a father. The moment he found out, his perspective on life shifted instantly. All the movie premieres and the big Hollywood parties suddenly seemed very small. The only thing that mattered was this new life growing inside Jennifer. He started to prepare himself. He read books about parenting. He talked about the future with a kind of excited sparkle in his eyes that his friends hadn't seen in years. He imagined teaching a child how to ride a bike, how to read, and how to be kind in a world that wasn't always kind. He was ready to build the stable, loving home he had never really had as a kid. He bought a house. He set up a nursery. He was ready to love someone more than he had ever loved anything. But life is unpredictable, and sometimes it is cruel. Near the end of the pregnancy, something went wrong. It was a silent tragedy that happened behind closed doors. On December 24th, 1999, the baby girl, whom they had named Ava, was stillborn. She was born into a silence that was louder than any explosion in his action movies. There were no cries, no first breath, just a heavy, suffocating quiet that filled the room. Keanu held his daughter in his arms. She was perfect, but she wasn't alive. In that moment, the world he had started to build crumbled. The joy he felt just days before turned into a deep, sharp pain that cut through his chest. He had to say hello and goodbye at the same time. It is a pain that no parent should ever have to feel, a grief that doesn't make sense. He walked out of the hospital without the child he had dreamed of raising, and the world looked gray and cold. The loss of Ava did something that fame and fortune couldn't do. It broke his heart. Keanu and Jennifer were devastated. Grief is a strange thing. It brings people together, but it also pushes them apart because the pain is so heavy that it's hard to share. They tried to support each other, but looking at one another was a constant reminder of what they had lost. Eventually, the relationship became too painful to hold on to, and they separated. They remained friends, bound by the love they had for their unborn daughter, but they went their separate ways to try and heal. Keanu threw himself back into work, not because he loved it more, but because it was a distraction. He started filming the sequels to The Matrix, a movie where the hero can stop bullets and bend the rules of reality. It was a cruel irony. He was playing a character who could save the world, but in his own life, he couldn't save the person who mattered most. He would go to the set in the morning, put on the costume, and fight bad guys on screen. Then, when the director yelled cut, he would go back to his trailer and sit alone with his thoughts. Just as he was trying to learn how to live with this hole in his heart, tragedy struck again. It was April 2001, just over a year after losing Ava. Jennifer was driving in Los Angeles when her car crashed into a row of parked vehicles. She was killed instantly. The news reached Keanu like a physical blow. First his daughter, then the mother of his child. It was too much. It felt like the universe was conspiring against him, testing the limits of how much pain one human spirit can take. He didn't hide from the public eye in anger, and he didn't lash out. Instead, he became quieter. He asked for privacy for Jennifer's family, showing immense grace even while his own world was shattering. He attended her funeral, standing under bright, indifferent sky, saying goodbye to yet another piece of his heart. The weight he carried on his shoulders was now heavier than ever. In the years that followed, people often saw Keanu alone. They would see him walking through the city, eating a sandwich on a park bench, or riding the subway. A photo of him sitting on a bench, looking small and sad with a sandwich in his hand, spread across the internet. People called him the sad Keanu and turned it into a joke. They didn't know the story behind the sad eyes. They didn't know that he wasn't just lonely, he was grieving. He was a man who had lost the future he had planned and was trying to figure out how to keep going without it. But even in the deepest depths of this sadness, Keanu didn't become bitter. He didn't curse the world. He just accepted the pain as part of his life. He learned that grief is like a heavy stone you carry in your pocket. You never get rid of it, but you eventually get used to the weight. He realized that life is fragile and can be taken away in a second. This made him value the people around him even more. He became kinder, softer. He treated everyone with respect, from the person serving him coffee to the crew members on his movie sets. He knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be the new kid, to be in pain. So he made sure that no one around him ever felt invisible if he could help it. He gave away millions of dollars from his Matrix earnings to the special effects team because he felt they deserved it more than he did. He bought motorcycles for his stunt team as a thank you for risking their bodies for his movie. He didn't do these things for praise. He did them because he knew that money and success don't fix a broken heart, but kindness can make the journey a little easier for someone else. The sad Keanu on the bench wasn't just a man in despair. He was a man who was understanding the true cost of life. He was learning that love and loss are two sides of the same coin. To love deeply is to risk losing deeply. And he had chosen to love. This period of his life was the hardest test he ever faced. He lost his daughter. He lost his partner. And he felt a loneliness that most people couldn't imagine. But he didn't let it turn him into stone. He let it turn him into something better, someone more human. He walked the fire of his own life and came out the other side, still standing, still breathing, and still ready to love again, even after everything. He carried the memories of Ava and Jennifer with him, not as burdens, but as reminders to cherish every single moment. He was no longer just the action hero on the screen. He was a survivor in real life, fighting a battle most people never see. While the world was busy watching him play the hero on the big screen, fighting bad guys and stopping explosions, Keanu was fighting a much quieter and more important battle in real life. Just as he was dealing with the crushing weight of losing his daughter and his partner, life threw another challenge at him. This time, it wasn't about his own heart, but about the heart of the person he loved most in the world, his sister, Kim, since they were children. Keanu had always felt a fierce need to protect Kim. When they were young, he was the one who made her laugh when their mother was busy working. He was the one who promised to look after her. That promise didn't fade when he became a movie star. In fact, it became even more important. In the late 1990s, around the same time his personal life was falling apart, Kim was diagnosed with leukemia. It was a terrifying word that brought back the feeling of helplessness he had felt when his friend River died. But this time, he couldn't just mourn. He had to act. He had to fight. Keanu did something that very few people in his position would do. He stopped putting his career first. Hollywood is a place that eats people up if they leave for too long. If an actor disappears, the world moves on to the next new face. But Keanu didn't care. He paused his life to be by his sister's side. He wasn't interested in being a celebrity anymore. He was interested in being a brother. He put his projects on hold. He flew back and forth from movie sets to hospitals, making sure she was never alone. For several years, Kim's life became a cycle of hospitals, doctors, and treatments. It is a grueling, exhausting process that wears down even the strongest people. Keanu was there for every step of it. He didn't hire people to sit with her so he could go to parties. He sat in the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting rooms himself. He held her hand during the painful sessions. He learned about the disease, the medications, and the side effects. He wanted to understand exactly what she was going through, so he could help her carry the burden. During this time, Keanu became the anchor for his family. Just like when they were kids, he was the steady force in the storm. He used the money he had earned from movies to make sure she had the best doctors and the most comfortable care possible. He didn't talk about it to the press. He didn't want to meddle for being a good brother. In his mind, this is just what you do. This is what family means. You show up when things are ugly. You show up when there is no glory, only fear and pain. There's a famous story that shows just how much he cared. Keanu bought a house for himself, a place where he could finally have a home base. But before he moved in, he didn't think about himself. He thought about Kim. He designed the house so that she would be comfortable. He made sure there was space for her. He wanted to create a sanctuary where she could feel safe and peaceful away from the sterile smell of hospitals. He wanted to build a home where they could just be siblings again, drinking tea and watching movies, forgetting about the sickness for a little while. Watching someone you love suffer is harder than suffering yourself. Keanu would have traded places with her in a second if he could. Seeing his strong, vibrant sister weakened by the disease broke his heart, but he never let her see him break. He had to be the strong one now. He cracked jokes to make the nurses smile. He stayed late into the night, reading to Kim when she couldn't sleep. He treated her not like a patient, but like the best friend she had always been. The battle against leukemia lasted for nearly a decade. It was a marathon, not a sprint. There were good days and bad days. There were times when the news was hopeful and times when the fear came back. But Keanu never wavered. His loyalty was absolute. He showed the world that success isn't about how many awards you have on your shelf or how much money is in your bank account. Real success is about who stands next to you when the lights go out. Real success is keeping a promise you made when you were a little boy. Because of his dedication and the incredible care she received, Kim eventually went into remission. The cancer that had threatened to take her away went into hiding. It was a victory, but a quiet one. There were no explosions or cheering crowds. It was just a brother and a sister, looking at each other with relief, knowing they had made it through the darkness together. They had survived the chaos of their childhood, and now they had survived this. This experience changed Keanu deeply. It stripped away any ego he might have had left. When you spend years watching someone fight for their life, you stop caring about silly things. You stop caring if your hair looks perfect or if people are talking about you. You learn that life is precious and fragile. You learn that time is the most valuable thing you can give to someone. During these years, Keanu became known for being humble and grounded, even more so than before. While other actors were demanding huge trailers and special treatment, Keanu was happy to eat sandwich wraps on the floor of his trailer with the crew. He was happy to take the subway. He had seen real suffering, real pain, and the fake glamour of Hollywood meant nothing to him. He knew that a fancy car or a big house couldn't protect you from sickness or sadness. The only thing that mattered was love and connection. He also became incredibly generous, but in secret. He didn't give money to get his name in the newspaper. He gave money because he knew it could help. After seeing what his sister went through, he started a private foundation to support cancer research. He didn't name it after himself. He didn't hold galas to show off. He just quietly poured millions of dollars into finding a cure so that other brothers and sisters wouldn't have to go through the same hell. He gave money to children's hospitals. He helped pay for the education of his crew members' children. He did these things quietly, often without the recipients ever knowing who the money came from. People around him noticed a change. He was softer now. He had a patience that came from sitting in hospital rooms for hours on end. He listened better. When he talked to fans, he really looked at them. He treated everyone with a gentle respect because he knew that everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle that you know nothing about. He had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and he had come out the other side wanting to be kind, not cruel. By the time Kim was healthy again, Keanu was a different man than the one who had started this journey. The boy who moved around constantly had finally created a stable home. The man who lost his daughter had channeled that love into saving his sister. The actor who wanted to be famous realized that fame was just a tool to help the people he loved. He walked through the world with a sort of quiet grace. He didn't need to shout to be heard. He didn't need to act tough to be strong. His strength came from his ability to endure, to love without conditions, and to put others first. He had faced the worst things life could throw at him: the abandonment of his father, the loneliness of his childhood, the tragic death of his best friend, the loss of his child, the illness of his sister. Most people would have broken. Most people would have become angry or bitter. But not Keanu. He took all that pain and transformed it into empathy. He became the kind of person who makes the world a little less cold just by being in it. He was no longer just a movie star. He was a man who had truly lived, a man who had loved deeply and lost greatly, and yet still chose to open his heart again. He proved that being a hero isn't about what you do in a movie. It's about who you are when the cameras are off. It's about sitting in a chair next to your sister, holding her hand, and telling her everything is going to be okay, even when you are terrified yourself. That is the true definition of strength. The years moved forward, and Keanu moved with them. He was no longer the young man with the spiky hair and the reckless energy. He was now a man with graying temples and eyes that had seen the other side of sorrow. The public had watched him grow up on screen, from the silly time-traveling teenager to the martial arts master. But in real life, he was growing into something much more important than a movie character. He was becoming a symbol of quiet resilience. He hadn't just survived the storms of his past. He had learned how to walk through them without losing his way. Then came a movie role that felt strangely close to his own heart. It was a film called John Wick. In the story, the main character is a retired hitman who loses his wife to an illness and is left with nothing but a dog and his grief. When the dog is killed, the man loses control and seeks revenge. On the surface, it looked like just another action movie with fast cars and big guns. But for Keanu, it was much deeper. He understood that character's pain better than anyone. He knew what it felt like to have the person you loved taken away. He knew the silence of an empty house. He knew the feeling of wanting to give up, but having to keep going anyway. When he played John Wick, he didn't have to pretend to be sad. The exhaustion and the heaviness in his eyes were real. He channeled his own life experiences into the character. Every punch he threw and every obstacle he overcame in the movie felt like a metaphor for his real life. He was a man fighting his way through the darkness, not to save the world, but to honor the love he had lost. Audiences connected with it immediately. They weren't just watching a cool action hero. They were watching a man who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, fighting back against it. But while he was playing this legendary fighter on screen, the real Keanu was becoming known for something completely different off screen. He was becoming famous for being kind. It sounds strange to say that someone is famous for being nice, but in a world full of famous people acting spoiled or demanding, Keanu stood out like a sore thumb. He didn't travel with an army of bodyguards. He didn't demand special treatment. In fact, he often tried to avoid it. There are countless stories of people running into him in the most ordinary places. Someone might see him on the subway in New York City, standing up to give a seat to an elderly person or a woman holding a child. He wouldn't make a big scene about it. He would just stand quietly, holding onto the strap, looking like any other commuter. One time, a fan saw him eating a sandwich on a park bench, looking a little sad. The internet turned the picture into a joke, calling him Sad Keanu. But the truth was, He wasn't looking for attention. He was just a human being taking a moment to breathe, enjoying the simple act of eating lunch outside, away from the cameras. His generosity became the stuff of legend in Hollywood, not because he talked about it, but because the people he helped talked about it. When he made the Matrix movies, he earned a massive amount of money. He could have kept it all to buy mansions and yachts. Instead, he did something unheard of. He took millions of dollars out of his own salary and gave it to the special effects team and the costume designers. He knew that they were the ones who made the movie look good, but they were often paid the least. He wanted to make sure they were rewarded for their hard work. He did the same thing on the John Wick set. He bought the stunt team custom-made motorcycles to say thank you for risking their safety for the movie. He didn't do these things for the newspapers. He didn't hold a press conference to announce his charity. If people hadn't told the story, no one would have known. That was the point. For Keanu, kindness wasn't a strategy for publicity. It was just the right thing to do. He knew what it felt like to struggle. He knew that a little bit of extra money could change a crew member's life, help them buy a house, or pay for their child's education. So he gave. He gave quietly and without expecting anything back. As he got older, he also found a new kind of peace and simplicity. He didn't live in a giant fortress with high walls. He lived in a normal house or sometimes in apartments. He was often seen wearing the same battered leather jacket and boots for years. He didn't care about fashion. He didn't care if people thought he looked rich. He just wanted to be comfortable. He enjoyed riding his motorcycle through the canyons of Los Angeles, feeling the wind on his face, free from the noise of the industry. He found joy in reading books, playing music, and spending time with his close friends. And then, when everyone thought he might be alone forever, he surprised the world again. He stepped out onto a red carpet holding hands with a woman, an artist named Alexandra. He smiled a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. He wasn't hiding his happiness. He wasn't trying to protect his heart by keeping it locked away. He was taking a risk again. He was showing the world that even after losing so much, you can still find love. It was a powerful message to everyone who had ever been hurt. It said that pain does not have to be the end of your story. You can be broken and still be beautiful. You can lose everything and still believe in love. Looking at him today, people don't just see an actor. They see a survivor. They see a man who walked through fire and didn't let it burn him down. Instead, he let the fire temper him, making him stronger and more compassionate. The boy who moved from city to city, looking for a home, finally found that home within himself. He realized that he didn't need a permanent address or a perfect family to be whole. He carried his family with him in his heart. The memory of his daughter, the love for his sister, the friendship of the ones he lost. Keanu Reeves' journey isn't a fairy tale. It's a real-life story, which means it has scars and tears. But that is exactly why we admire him. He shows us that you don't have to be perfect to be good. You don't have to have an easy life to be kind. He proved that the strongest thing a person can do is not to hide their pain, but to use it to understand the pain of others. When he signed an autograph for a fan now, he doesn't just scribble his name. He looks them in the eye. He shakes their hand. He treats them like a friend. He knows that a simple moment of kindness can make a difference in someone's day. He has lived a life full of heartbreak, but he has chosen to let love win in the end. He is the man we admire not because of the characters he plays, but because of the man he has become, gentle, humble, and incredibly resilient. He is living proof that even after the darkest night, the sun eventually rises again.